My life's passion has been associated with the debate between creationists and evolutionists. When I first became a Christian, I was a new graduate in electrical engineering from Georgia Tech, and I was a committed Christian, but I knew that there was a serious problem between what science said. By the way, to say that science says something is a logical fallacy, but people use it all the time. And what I had to believe was true, because I couldn't accept a faith that was illogical or that simply was true only in a metaphorical sense. So what happened one day is somebody gave me, and this shows you how long ago it was, I'm speculating it was in 1975, somebody gave me a cassette tape and said, you need to listen to this. And it was a debate between a guy named Henry Morris and Dwayne Gish and two speakers from San Diego State University about this creation evolution thing. And I remember thinking, oh no, this is going to be awful. The two Christian guys are going to get eaten up by these two zoologists from San Diego State. Well, that is not what happened. Henry Morris and Dwayne Gish disassembled those guys. I mean, they totally took them down, strictly on the basis of science. They didn't refer to the Bible in one time during that debate. And I remember thinking, this is a watershed event in my life. I've never heard anything like this. And so Henry had written a book that you may be familiar with. And by the way, does anybody know who Henry Morris is here? Okay. Then you know he wrote the Genesis flood, right? Okay, and the Genesis flood is the book that I bought. I read it cover to cover. I read it cover to cover several times. And then I started, just through luck, giving speeches in people's homes. And although I was always dealing just with the creation evolution issue, I always got questions about the ark. And today, that's what I'm going to share with you, is the kind of question. There's 8 of them. I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know whether I have 10 minutes worth of material here or 5 hours worth of material here. It'll all depend. But as I was preparing for this, I went back and I started remembering the kinds of questions that people asked me. And my guess is, you're going to guess a lot of what these are. And Brand covered a lot of them 2 weeks ago, which really made me mad, because now I've got to redo my whole speech. But instead, I've decided to go over some of the same issues from a completely different perspective. I'm going to arrive at the same conclusion that he did, but you may be surprised how I get there. So anyway, because I was preparing these speeches, I like to anticipate questions that people will ask me, and I came up with one. I don't even remember what the question was, but I thought, oh man, if somebody asked me this, I do not know what I'm going to say. So this was before the internet, and I got this harebrained idea. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to call Henry Morris, and I'm going to ask him this question. Now, you got to remember, I'm nobody. I'm just some guy, and I managed to find the phone number of the ICR in El Cajon, California, and I called up and I said, can I speak to Henry Morris? And I'll be darned if the next thing that didn't happen was this guy comes on the phone and goes, hello? And who is this? Well, it was Henry Morris. And so I asked him my question, he gave me the answer, and that was the beginning of a relationship. What Henry liked about me is not, well, he was an engineer and I was an engineer. That's as simple as that. His board of directors was all medical doctors. And he just decided he needed a little diversity. So he asked me to serve on the board of directors. I had no credentials for this whatsoever, other than I had an electrical engineering degree, and I think he was something to do with water, which would qualify you to write a book about floods. So because of that, I had been an eyewitness to a lot of things that are just so amazing I was there when they funded what's called the RAPE project, and I hope to get to the RAPE project. I was there when they hired this skinny little guy out of Australia by the name of Ken Ham. I was there when they did some of the things that they did, and I got to speak to a lot of the people that were doing these things. But that's all I am. I happened to be there. I can't tell you how grateful I am of the opportunity just to be there and just to see these people and just to talk to them. But I have no credibility on my own. Like I said, all I can do. Now, I have thought of some things that I can't find any support in the literature for, and I'm going to propose those to you today, see what you think about it. But what I discovered is that I could teach in somebody's home, and the neighbors would come and they would listen, and I don't know whether they believe me or not, but I was just doing my job, I guess. But when I went to churches, that's when I got real opposition. Now, I don't think that's going to be a problem in this group because I've sat in on a couple of your classes. But let me start off my presentation by saying this. Accepting the global flood of Noah and the ark is not a salvation issue for you. But it is a logic and credibility issue. Your children are looking at this group and knowing me, your grandchildren are more logical than you are, and if you don't have a good defense for believing in creation and believing in the flood of Noah, they, being more logical than you, are more likely to reject the gospel. Now, you yourself, as a Christian, we all know that it's only faith in Christ that is a salvation issue. But if you can't share your faith, it becomes a salvation issue to other people. And that's how I want to start off my presentation today, with a little short history of the failures of the church. Oh, and let me add one other thing. I'm going to frequently confuse the age of the earth with the flood of Noah, because they're really just two different sides of the same coin. I personally don't know of a single person who believes in an old earth, by old I mean billions of years old, and believes that there was a global flood. Conversely, I don't know of a single person who believes in a global flood who doesn't think that the earth is relatively young. So they go hand in hand. They may not be as joined as two sides of the same coin, but they certainly go hand in hand. So if I confuse the two or mix them up, I'm telling you they're the same exact issue. So I'd like to start off, I assume you've heard of a guy by the name of Francis Schaeffer, who wrote a book, How Should We Then Live? So let me read you the foreword to Francis Schaeffer's book. He says, people have presuppositions. Now that's the word I'm seizing on, presuppositions. They will live more consistently on the basis of these presuppositions than even they themselves realize. By presuppositions, we mean the basic way that an individual looks at life, his basic worldview, the grid through which he sees the world. Presuppositions rest upon that which a person considers to be truth. People's presuppositions lay a grid for all they bring forth into the external world, and they provide the basis for their values and therefore for their decisions. Now, I remember when I read that, thinking that was one of the smartest things I ever heard in my life. And the issue of the first 11 chapters of Genesis is all based, your interpretation will always be based on your presuppositional beginning place. Now, I'm not as artful in the language as either Ken Ham or Francis Schaeffer, but I've thought of my own way of putting this into words. So I'm interested in your reaction to my little take on this. I'd like to know whether you think this is true or not true, what I'm about to say. The way things are now is the way things have always been. Now, what's your gut reaction to that?
No.
Well, but, okay, I'm surprised. I thought I was going to get a lot of yeses out of that. So why, it sounds like the majority view here is no. Why are the way things are now not the way things have always been?
Scripture says it.
Where? What are the things that are different?
The world that then was no longer exists. I think it's in 1 Peter or
2 Peter.
2 Peter. There's somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. All right. But what I'm telling you is your neighbors, your non-Christian neighbors, they may not be able to express it that way, but they take the view that the way things are now is the way things have always been. That is their presupposition. So now let's do our woeful history of the church. For 1,800 years, the church took the position that the earth was created in 6 days, by and large. There's always people who disagree, but by and large in 6 days, and that it was about 6,000 years ago, and there was a global flood of Noah that covered the whole earth, and that was the teaching of the church. Then in the late 1700s, certain scientists started coming along proposing alternative perspectives. Now I'm probably not going to go through the name of every single one of these authors, but I want to just lay the groundwork. It started approximately in 1780 with a guy named Count de Buffon. He wrote a book, and his book was named The Epics of Nature, and he proposed a scandalous idea that the earth had cooled from a hot molten ball in about 75,000 years. Now, that seems laughably recent compared to the old ages we hear all the time now, right? But that was scandalously long compared to 6,000 years. That's an order of magnitude difference. And he ran some experiments, and they're not considered viable scientific experiments anymore. But the point is, he kind of got the ball rolling. Then came a German by the name of Abraham Werner. He wrote a book called The Short Classification and Description of the Various Rocks. His title makes you think that it's not going to be a short classification, right? And he proposed that he recognized that the world was covered in sedimentary rock. Now, the church had always recognized that and believed that the flood of Noah explained the earth being covered with sedimentary rock. But he proposed that the rocks were the result of a slowly receding global ocean that he took the ante up to millions of years. So now we've got two different explanations for how sedimentary rock got to be there. And by the way, everywhere you look right now, if we dug down, we'd discover that we're on sedimentary rock right now. Now, the next guy you may have heard of, his name is James Hutton. He was an Englishman, and he wrote a book called The Theory of the Earth. And here, I'm going to quote you from his book. And I want you to tie it back to Francis Schaeffer's presuppositional construct. He said, the past history of our globe must, and I emphasize must, be explained by what can be seen to be happening now. No powers are to be employed that are not natural to the globe. No action to be admitted except those of which we know the principle. So would he have agreed or disagreed with my statement that the way things are now is the way things have always been? He would have agreed, right? He would say, well, he goes on to say, well, he said it must be explained by what we can see to be happening now. So the way things are now is the way things have always been. That's how we should interpret everything. He goes on to say in another part of his book, surely general deluges form no part of the theory of the earth. For the purpose of the earth is evidently to maintain vegetable and animal life and not to destroy it. Now, in the first quote, he didn't even give a reason why. He just said, this is the way it must be. This is how we must interpret all the rocks and everything we see on this earth. Now, at least here, he gives an explanation of the reason why. He posits, at least, that evidently the earth is to maintain vegetable and animal life. But when he refers to general deluges, what is he talking about? The flood of Noah, right? Let me read it again. Surely general deluges form no part of the theory of the earth. Okay, now he just puts that out there and says, this is the way it is. Doesn't give any reasons, but if he can get people to approach it that way, he can change minds. Now, there's a bunch more people that came between 1780 and the last guy who's the most important of all, Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell is another Englishman. He published a book in 1833 called Principles of Geology. And he's given credit for coming up with, when I first started speaking on these things, it was what everybody except Christians believed. And here's what he said. I've always been strongly impressed with the weight of evidence of those who say, for the sake of revelation, for the sake of the Bible, as well as the science of truth in every form, the physical part of geological inquiry ought to be conducted as if the scriptures were not in existence. He started what we now know as the philosophical framework of naturalistic uniformitarianism, which is a needlessly long, but here's what naturalism is. Naturalism states that nature is all that exists. In other words, it's atheistic. Everything can and must be explained by time, plus chance, plus the laws of nature working on matter, and that the processes of geological change have always been operating at the same rate, the same frequency, and the same power as today. How would Charles Lyell, what would he have thought about the way things are now as the way things have always been? That is what he said. That is what he said. So how did the church fathers react? Now this time period was from like 1780 through Lyell publishing in 1833. So what's that, like 50, 60 years? In 50 to 60 years, the church gave in. Okay, now they gave in for the same reason I told you when we first started talking, because it's not a salvation issue. And they wanted to be on the right side of science. But we all know, what can the righteous do if the foundations are destroyed? The foundation was destroyed. What then happened was the death knell, essentially, of Christianity in Europe and eventually here in the United States, when Charles Darwin published his book in 1859 called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, in which he did not document a single case of an origin of a single species by means of natural selection. And the church beat the scientific community to adopting an evolutionary worldview of the origin of life. Now, we think that Charles Darwin wrote his book, published his book a long time ago, but that was only 160 years ago. Where is Christianity today in Europe? Europe is the most difficult mission field in the world because it's foolishness to the Greeks. What's that, 1 Corinthians 1:23, I think it is. I could be mixing up my Bible verses, but what happened in 160 very short years is that the church in Europe is gone. And the church in the United States is max one generation behind. And it's for the same exact reason. The presuppositional base that everybody, except you guys, approach the world is through naturalistic uniformitarianism. And I'll have to admit, I was the same way. Even after I joined the board of the ICR, I'd be amazed how many times they would talk about things, and I'd think, that's not right. And I realized, wow, I still haven't straightened out my presuppositional basis. It took me a long time. This is built into us. Oh, actually, it was 1 Corinthians 1:23. We preach Christ crucified, and to the Jews it's a stumbling block, but to the Greeks it's foolishness. Scientifically, the gospel is foolishness to people who have a presuppositional basis of naturalism, uniformitarianism. So, now, oh my goodness, I'll never get through 8. Okay. So like I said, I've never spoken on the ark before. I've never spoken on the flood. I've only ever spoken on creation versus evolution. But like I said, people would ask these questions. It just shows how logical people are. You know, they would eventually jump to this. So I'm going to let you guess, what is the most common question I got? I bet you're going to be able to speculate. You may not get the most common one, but you're going to get a lot of them on this list. What do you think people ask me about the most? Any guesses?
How old was animals who on the ark?
Yeah, that's one of them. That's one of them for sure. Okay, let me just, dinosaurs.
Yeah, that's it.
I got questions on dinosaurs all the time. And I knew enough from reading Henry's book that, yeah. Oh, by the way, were dinosaurs on the ark?
Yeah.
Okay, you're right.
But they were.
But I'm going to take it, well, no, hang on. I'm going to take this from a different perspective. So you're right. I believe that dinosaurs were on the ark. Now, you'll be interested to know there's no biblical imperative that dinosaurs had to go on the ark. None. So why do I say that dinosaurs are on the ark? Suppose, and actually I got this question, and it was phrased just this way, and it stumped me at the time, and to my shame. This particular person I told him, yes, dinosaurs were on the ark. I probably said something dumb like the Bible says so, which it does not. And he posed back to me, well, wait a minute. Dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago, and if the ark and the flood actually happened, that would have just been a few thousand years ago. So dinosaurs couldn't have been on the ark. So let me read you what the biblical imperative is. Every beast after his kind. Now, I think dinosaurs are probably beasts, don't you? Okay, every beast after his kind, all the cattle, dinosaurs are not cattle. Every creeping thing, they're not creeping things except maybe if there's a teeny weeny dinosaur that I don't know about, and every fowl after his kind. So if dinosaurs were not extinct, then they would have been included probably in the beasts after his kind. But science has proven that dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago, so they couldn't have been on the ark, right? And I'm being the devil's advocate here. What's the biblical answer? Your presuppositions are wrong. The sedimentary rock is there because of Noah's flood, and dinosaurs are in the sedimentary rock. Therefore, they were alive at the time of the flood. You see how the age of the earth ties to the ark itself? If the evolutionary worldview that dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago, and if the biblical view that the ark was, 4,500 years ago, dinosaurs would not have been on the ark. Now, my opponent, the person who was asking, he wasn't an opponent, but he was a person at a meeting who asked me this question. He was being totally logical. And I was being totally logical. The thing that was different was our presuppositions, and I wasn't smart enough to know it at the time. So, yes, dinosaurs were on the ark because we know they were in existence at the time of the flood, because we know that the sedimentary rocks are there because of the flood. Got it? Otherwise, dinosaurs would not have been on the ark if such a thing had ever taken place. Well, there's a couple of ancillary questions that come up about dinosaurs, and Rand dealt with these. The next question is, oh, and I remember the guy going, oh man, you lost me there. There's no way a brontosaurus could have made it on the ark. And by the way, there's no such thing as a brontosaurus, a long story, but there are sauropod dinosaurs. And it's what when you think of a brontosaurus, that's what they are. But I'll disagree slightly with what I think you said, Rand. I think you said that Noah would have taken babies. Okay. And if you didn't, then my apologies. Here's what I think. Not all dinosaurs are big. Only the big ones were big, right? And all dinosaurs started off small because the largest fossilized dinosaur egg that's ever been found was about the size of a football. So even a brontosaurus would have started off when it hashed out about what would fit in a football. But I don't think God would have taken a baby dinosaur, because what's the purpose of the dinosaurs? Or all animals on the ark is to repopulate the earth, right? So probably he would have taken essentially a teenager, because as soon as he got off the ark, he has a job, or they have a job to do, right? And that's to repopulate the earth. So I'm thinking they would have maybe not been babies. They might have been whatever a teenage dinosaur was.
I can accept that.
Okay. Now, there are over 600 species of dinosaurs. So that's a lot of dinosaurs. And then we get into this discussion about kinds. And the people at the ark have narrowed it down. They think the biblical kind of dinosaurs numbered about, at the article I read, and you must have read the same one, that said 85. I've read one since then where they think they've narrowed it down to 80. But let's say it's 85. That's 170 dinosaurs, and if the average dinosaur was about the size of between a sheep and a buffalo, and even the big ones, if they were on the ark as teenagers, that would occupy about less than 2% of the ark. They fit fine on the ark. Okay, so now I never got this question, but you dealt with it, and I wanted to bring it up again. Is there any evidence that men ever lived with dinosaurs? Okay, what have you got?
Glen Rose, Texas, where the tracks were.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I will say the reading I did on that is people are being cautious about the Glen Rose find. So maybe, and that is.
And I'll say, when I questioned one of my anthropology professors about it, he was really honest, forthright guy. He said, I can't explain.
Yeah, okay. Oops, did I just drop something? Oh, dear. Okay, Brand mentioned flood legends. Well, do you know there's all kinds of legends that tie human communities together? There's flood legends. Those are the most common. Those are the only ones that are typically written down. But there's also dinosaur legends. There's also language legends associated with towers all over the world, everywhere. Now, the ones most commonly written down are flood legends, which we'll get to. But there's dinosaur legends. Just think about it. In China, they've got legends of dragons. In England, they've got St. George and the dragon. They're everywhere in the world. So now I'm going to do something that I would never do normally. I'm going to quote from that eminent Christian, I'm kidding, but I shouldn't kid, that eminent astrophysicist, Carl Sagan, okay? He wrote, you all know who he is. He had the Cosmos series. I love the Cosmos series. Oh, billions and billions. I can do my best Carl Sagan impression there. He wrote a book called The Dragons of Eden, in which he pointed out that you cannot dismiss all the legends of dragons around the world. So now, let me just read you what Carl Sagan. Now, there's a little bit of scientific stuff I'll have to go over here, but this is just a summary of what Carl Sagan said in his book, The Dragons of Eden. The pervasiveness of dragon myths in the folk legends of many cultures is no accident. It is a worldwide phenomenon. Now, this is the statement I'll have to come back to, but the R complex, I'll get to the R complex, is functioning in the dreams of humans. The dragons can be heard hissing and rasping, and the dinosaurs thunder still. What did he just do? He just tied, and he said, the dragons in legend and lore are in fact dinosaurs. Now, where did he think those legends came from? If you remember, he said the R complex is functioning still. That's just it was an evolutionary construct in the 1960s that the human brain, as it had evolved in stages, and the earliest stage was the reptile complex, R complex, okay? So Carl Sagan is an interesting guy, super smart guy, but he said a lot of really dumb things. I heard him say some things, not in person, but on TV. They were just so dumb, it was unbelievable. But he was saying essentially that deep inside your brain, the R complex, which is right at the top of the brain stem, was what was there when your ancestors were little bitty reptiles. And they were afraid of the really big reptiles, and they still remember, it still remembers. Now that's just absurd, but I thought I'd point out the fact that he himself tied dragon legends to dinosaurs. Now, okay, I'm going to give you a homework assignment because it turns out I've got 10 hours worth of stuff. And
Hey, let's get us all
okay, go home and Google dinosaur and Richard Bell's tomb. Okay, Richard Bell's tomb and dinosaurs. You got to do it. What you will find, Richard Bell is a guy who died and was buried in a church in England. He died in 1946, and they inscribed all kinds of critters around his tomb. And one of them, and there are all kinds of animals that people know what they are. They exist. Everybody knows them. Except there's one that absolutely looks like two brontosauruses. And what's even more interesting is that one of the brontosauruses has just a straight tail that tapers off to an end, but the other one has a clubbed tail with spikes on it. And I remember when I first discovered this in the literature I read, people would make so much fun of the fact that those creationists were talking about Richard Bell's tomb with a dinosaur with a clubbed spiked tail, until they discovered a sauropod dinosaur with a clubbed tail in China. And they discovered, and that was in 1987, and that one was called a Shunosaurus. And then there is a Spinosaurus that had spikes. It was a sauropod dinosaur with spikes on its tail. So now the joke's on them. The people who engraved that piece of metal apparently knew something that nobody knew back until 1987, is that certain sauropod dinosaurs had clubbed tails. Isn't that interesting? Now there's others. If you want to look at, I don't know how good there are. There's petroglyphs all around the world that look like dinosaurs. There's, there's a lot of evidence, and I'm never going to get through all this now. So I may come back to it, okay, about humans and dinosaurs. But the point is, there is evidence that humans lived with dinosaurs. People just don't want to believe it. And the reason they don't want to believe it is because of their presuppositions. They know that's not true. So even presented evidence, they're just not going to believe it.
They can't get past their presupposition of how to measure time, carbon dating. You have to agree that the value that gives to time passing is absolutely incorrect.
Oh, I've got a whole section here on radiometric dating. Believe me. Remember when I mentioned the RATE project?
Yeah.
The ICR funded a project to look at it. RATE stands for radiometric dating and the age of the Earth. And I actually got to vote on that, and that wasn't a lot of money. and that's no big deal because when you're a member of the board of the ICR, you did whatever Henry wanted you to do. That's just the way that worked. But he wanted to do that, and so we funded it. And to show you how dumb I am, I remember thinking, well, that's a waste of money. That's going to go nowhere. Nobody's going to believe us, and they won't find anything. Well, I was exactly right about one of those things, and I was exactly wrong about the other. Nobody did believe what the RAPE project published, but they found devastating data about radiometric dating in particular carbon-14 dating.
Right.
Are you familiar with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, and after they continued that survey or study, they recognized in measuring time can only be conceivably done by the speed of light.
Oh, now you're into astrophysics. Yeah, okay.
Beyond 6,000 years from the Earth, you should look back before that time to its actual beginning. Because light only travels out.
Yeah, the whole issue of the age of the Earth and time
Right.
is one of the things that's always bothered me. I've never felt like we had a really good answer to that. But I will say now, there's a guy out there named Jason Lyle, are you familiar with Jason?
Yeah, I've read it.
Okay. He's making me feel better about it, but that really is complex, and I haven't formulated it all in my head yet, so I can't address the age of the Earth and the time-light travel problem. So I'm not going to go over that today, but it's nice to meet somebody who's thought it through too, because it's an interesting thing. Okay, Rand did a good job of developing how many animals might have been on the ark. And once again, you read the same article I did. You came up with 6,744, but that's based on an assumption that when God said to take 7 pairs of all the clean animals, it's 7 pairs as opposed to 7. And the reading I did was that, well, half the people seem to think this, half people seem to think that. And I think it's 7 pairs. I think that is what it means. But I will say 6,744 animals still seems like too many to me. Now, it's way down from what the evolutionists used to taunt us with, of 60,000 species times 2 is 120,000 animals. Well, we've come from 120,000 all the way down to 6,744. But if it was 7 individuals instead of 7 pairs, that would reduce the number by another 2,303 animals. I don't know how many animals 8 people could take care of every day for a year, but even 6,744 seems kind of high to me. I'm hoping it's a number lower than that, or I'm really impressed with Noah and his sons, because that's a lot of animals to take care of. Okay, I'm going to skip over everything that I prepared and get to the question, another question that we know the right answer to. Hang on a second. Well, I even forgotten what the subject was. Oh, okay. The question always came up, how could Noah have collected that many animals? Now, you know the answer to that, right? What's the answer? Okay, now here's my question. Why? God is not bashful about giving Noah big jobs. I mean, he told him to build an ocean liner. He told him to get all this food and put it in there. Why would he suddenly say, I've got this? Why would he do that? Any ideas? Now, by the way, this is my idea. This is totally my idea, so whether you like it or you don't, just blame me, okay? So that's the question. Any ideas why God would take that on? Because, like I said, he's not bashful about giving Noah a really big assignment.
Because he shut the door.
Well, that just means he shut the door. Why couldn't he have told Noah to go and collect the animals? Okay, now I'm going to give you my theory. And I think this is a logical theory. Are you familiar in hereditary studies of what's called the bottleneck effect? Let me read you a definition of the bottleneck effect. Let me see. The bottleneck effect happens, and this is a well-known phenomenon, by the way, happens when in some catastrophe, by the way, this is a Wikipedia definition, so when some catastrophe like an earthquake or a tsunami kills off most of the population at random and leaves only a handful of survivors. The catastrophe has to be something that strikes at random, however, and kills individuals irrespective of the genes that they carry. Now, what is the problem with the bottleneck effect? What happens is if you have a small remaining population, they have a small percentage of the genetic heritage of the larger population that existed before. So you lose tons of hereditary information. Okay, so the reason God did it is because only God could do it. He had to know, first of all, he knew two things Noah could not have known. He knew what the post-flood world was going to be like and what genes would be suitable for surviving in the post-flood world. He also knew which animals had those genes. He wasn't selecting them because of any other reason. He was looking at their he was looking into their DNA and saying, these are the 2 or the 14, depending on the animal, that have the genetic makeup that they need to survive in a post-flood world. Noah can't, actually, if God were to tell us to do that today, we couldn't do it because we only think we know stuff about genetics. We don't know anything about the complexity. We know certain things, but the more we learn, the more we realize we don't learn. So God was taking care of the one thing that only he could do. And by the way, there's something also called the founder's effect, which is when a population gets isolated from the larger population. The Bible records one bottleneck effect, that's the flood, and one founder's effect, that's the Tower of Babel, right? Where all the populations got separated from each other, yes.
But even if you don't use that theory, God was sovereignly orchestrating the event.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If you acknowledge, you don't even have to be a scientist to understand or ever heard of those bottlenecks or whatever theories, because he was orchestrating the entire.
My question was just, why would God suddenly, I mean, he gave such big jobs to Noah, why wouldn't he say that? And to me, the answer is because only God could do it.
Well, that's my point, though.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah. I'm agreeing with you. I'm just saying, so.
I mean, that supports his sovereignty.
Yes, it does.
But the real issue is that he was sovereign to do that.
All right, so I'm doing what I swear I don't want to. I mean, I published this little book to myself because I wanted to stay on subject, and then I ran out of time. And so now I'm doing what I always do and rambling around. But I want to go to the rate project. I told you about the rate project, right? The first thing they did after they funded the rate project is one of the guys from ICR went up onto Mount St. Helens. Now, y'all all know about Mount St. Helens. It erupted in 1980, in 1982, 1986. He went right to the top of the lava dome, which sounds like a really bad idea to me, but that's what he did. And he got a couple of rocks. And he took the rocks down and he split them into parts and he ground some to powder and he crushed others and separated out mineral by minerals that he saw in the rocks. And he sent them all off to a laboratory to potassium argon date the rocks. Now, the first question that came back from the laboratory is, what will you accept? which is kind of a funny question. And we're asking you, how old these rocks are. So he told them, well, we expect low argon levels, which means we expected you to get a relatively young date. So here's what came back. Let me get my table. Now, first of all, how old are those rocks? Like 10 years old at that time, right? Okay. The whole rock, the powder, came back 350,000 years old. Now, the minerals came back different ages. Feldspar came back younger, 340,000 years old. The oldest came back 2,800,000 years old. Now that's off by just a little bit, right? Because they're 10 years old. So there's something seriously wrong. Now, other people, at the time he published this, everybody said, well, you just don't know what you're doing. But other people have reproduced these kind of findings. Potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium, all these methods always give old ages. Now, the defense that I've heard is that, well, they're accurate when the rocks are actually ancient, but they're inaccurate when the rocks are actually young. Well, what kind of a defense is that? I mean, my goodness. The whole question is which are young and which are old. And they always disagree with each other. I've got tables and tables here. And carbon-14 has been found in diamonds and coal samples, which means they cannot possibly be as old as people say they are. They have to be less than 80,000 years old. So, sorry I ran out of time.
You gave us some really good insight, but I think we got time for at least one question. Does anybody have one question that they're burning to ask?
Oh, I do. What about the soft tissue that they find?
That's one I had to skip over. Yeah, in 2004, Mary Schweitzer discovered soft tissue in a T-Rex bone. That's impossible if it's, and this particular bone was dated at 68 million years old. Now, she was attacked as a bad scientist, but it's been replicated now over 100 times, not just in T-Rex bones. As a matter of fact, I've got a chart here, not that this, you can see it, but that's the list of, you can just see there's an entire page of examples of soft tissue that cannot survive more than 1 million years under any circumstances. And some of the old, and they've found in many different types of fossils. They've found all over the world. They've been found in every layer of rock. Now, it's one of those big, and that's not a rape finding, by the way. This was just some poor lady who happened to discover the truth. And she doesn't even, she is, I understand, a Christian, but she doesn't believe in a young age of the earth. So she's not in favor necessarily of her own findings, but she was truthful enough to publish the results. Yes, that is a thing. That is a big thing. And you can imagine a guy like me that's been in this since 1975, that was a world-changing event in 2005 when she published her paper. And now, over 100 examples? My goodness, somebody's got some serious reconsideration to do. Great question, and that was one of my points. I just didn't get to it. So.
I can't help but to mention this is your Bible, the Henry Morris King James Version.
Yeah.
And if Henry Morris wanted you on his board, that is just a wonderful.
I'm just honored to be there.
Yeah, I was going to say.
All I can tell you is it was such a fluke, such a fluke.
Yeah,
he just called me up one day and said, would you like to be on the board? And it was as if the president had called. I hadn't talked to him in 2 years.
And I'm going to mention, they have moved the Institute for Creation Research up to Dallas. And there is just a fabulous museum there. So if you ever have a chance, museum. I mean, it's well worth the trip.
Yeah. The ICR has lessened, and Answers in Genesis has kind of taken its place. but that's fine. All that matters is if the message gets out there. And, you know, Ken Ham, I think, was just the God-appointed man to succeed Henry Morris. It's as simple. And Henry was an academic, and Ken is a communicator. They're just different.
Yeah.
Well, you gave us some great insights today, and let's give Richard a hand.